Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Community Book Club featuring Katie Wager's book, A Pale Light in the Black, which is so awesome. We're going to have an amazing discussion tonight. My name is Rachel Bush. I am the president-elect for the League of Utah Writers, and I hope you enjoy tonight's discussion. I am going to turn the time over now to Alex J. Lohr, who will be moderating this event. And thank you so much for joining us.
Hi all. So welcome today. I'm actually kind of excited that we might be a smaller group because that means we can just kind of have a chat. That's kind of how I like to run smaller group sessions, as long as everyone is okay with that. I am going to ask everyone on the panel first to introduce themselves, what they do, how they come to sci-fi. Obviously, we have KB here, so I'm gonna probably start with you. And then I have some questions prepped, and I have some questions from Rachel, who was like, hey, here are my very nerdy thoughts. And I'm like, I really appreciate this. Yes, this is great. So hopefully you enjoy this as well, but I really also want to make space for everyone else's questions. So feel free to either unmute or drop questions in the chat. I think, again, for a small group, either is okay, and we'll just pants our way through this book club. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know, I'm more of a plotter with a good dash of pantsing, so let's just go with that. But yeah, let's do introductions. KB, do you want to start?
I can. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I am KB Wagers, science fiction author, general malcontent, and currently overly obsessed with Horizon Forbidden West. So apologies in advance because it has eaten my brain and I'm having trouble focusing on anything else.
It looks so good. I want
so
a PlayStation, something fierce.
Yeah, it's so gorgeous. I have written I have published 8 books to date, 6 in the Hale Bristol series, the Andronin War and the Farian War trilogies, which feature Hale Bristol, who is a gun runner turned empress. And then 2 books so far in the Neo G series, the first one that we're talking about tonight, which is A Pale Light in the Black, and Hold Fast Through the Fire. The 3rd book comes out next summer, I think. And is at the moment tentatively titled Ghosts of Trappist. So, and that is going to be pirates and spaceships and AIs, and a lot of fun, I think. So, I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I just recently moved, with 3 relatively obnoxious cats and more plants than a human being should probably own. However, I continue to buy them because they make me happy and we live in a hellscape. So there you go.
The cats will save us.
The cats and the plants will take over. It's fine. I actually have a question on that for later. Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Adam Berg. My writing background is for film, mostly sketch comedy. Worked for Studio C for 7 years as a writer and performer. Then the original Studio C team, we left to start our own company. So now I have written for a couple indie sitcoms, which you can find on YouTube or on the Angel Studios app. And I also write fantasy, so sci-fi isn't my genre. I feel a little genre ignorant in terms of approaching this book, which is fine. I still enjoy sci-fi, but it's just not what I tend to read. But it's fun, and I have written and published 2 novels, both young adult fantasy novels, through a small press called Carpe Vitam. And I'm working on a new adult novel at the moment. So that's what I'm doing. That's me.
That's awesome. Okay, thanks. And I'm Alex J. Lohr. I also write under Alex Harrow. That's what my first book in series, Empire of Light, is published under with 9 Star Press, which is a queer sci-fi. I pitch it as gay firefly with magic. It's kind of like sci-fi meets space opera, but what if it never leaves Earth? And I also am working on a sequel for that currently. I dabble in alternate history fantasy. I do a bunch of shorter stuff, just kind of like all over the place. So I think you're definitely not alone in the, hey, I'm just a fantasy person or a fantasy and sci-fi person. But yeah, like, so that's actually kind of my first question. However, how I like to approach like book clubs is to ask like, what was your favorite part about this book? I think Adam and I both kind of blitzed through it, and I'm actually really, really happy I did, because I honestly needed something to just keep me going this week. Like, yeah, I'm a high school teacher and it's the end of the quarter and it's quarter 3. So my seniors are just dead inside. And I'm like, okay, let's talk space heists. And I teach writing as well. So that's kind of always fun to talk about, like what you're currently reading. But yeah, what were your favorite parts? I'm gonna call on Adam first,
Sure,
and
yeah.
then like we'll come back to KB as the author. And then I'll chime in too. I'm kind of going to double up as moderator, but also panelist who won't shut up.
Okay. So I will preface this, like Alex said, I blitzed through it, listened to it, the audiobook, like in just a matter of a couple days. So I wish I could have basked in it a little more and hopefully retained more information. But even through my approach, I feel like it was a different kind of book for me, in the sense that it seemed very rich on character. And I feel like my assumption is that our author made that choice very intentionally. It almost felt like Star Trek, in the sense that it feels like a show and chapters feel like episodes, and we're getting a chance to understand and know and sort of live with these people and get to know them on a very rich basis. And I think that was done successfully.
Yeah, I think I'm going to chime in before I go to you, KB. I think, like, for me, honestly, I was like, yes, like this is the kind of like sci-fi space opera that I want. That's like super character driven. I honestly, like, my favorite thing was Jinx's obsession with early 21st century culture. Like the fact that her robot dog is named Doge. I just died. I'm like, yes, please. Like, and people are like, why are you spamming us with these early 21st century memes? Like, no one understands. And I'm like, I kind of like that. Almost honestly made me think of one of my best friends is an AP art history teacher, and he sometimes sends us like the weirdest like artwork, like this is what's expressing our, like, I don't know, general malaise right now. And I'm like, you know what, like, I don't fully get the reference because I'm not an art historian, but I'm with you. I'm here for it. So I really liked how obviously we have that lens of like getting a lot of the, or maybe even all of the pop culture references, but putting that into like a sci-fi space where obviously that's like, I don't know, quasi ancient history. Well, maybe not quite ancient, but it's history, and kind of using that in there.
So that brings me in. Okay, I'm retired Latin and world history, ancient history teacher, and often that feels like science fiction to begin with. I remember when I was a young teen, when the Sputnik went up, that sort of dates me, I guess. And for much of my younger years, my intention was to be the first woman astronaut. And then I took chemistry in college, and that changed my mind.
Okay.
I think I remember the very first Star Trek, watching it on television. We waited, my husband and I waited for weeks to see that come on. I've always loved science fiction. I liked Pale Blue because I'm not really a sports fan. I mean, my dad dragged me to Major League Baseball games for, years in the summertime. And I know how the game goes. I know how football goes, but it's not really my thing. But when I started to read it, I thought, I'm not sure I really want to deal with this because I'm not really, into the sports thing. But it was the characters. And as Adam said, it was the characters and the situations. And it wasn't all heavy science fiction. I think we're kind of in the mood now for some lighter stuff. I don't know I don't need to know how the faster than light engine works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes us like familiar things with new things. Yeah.
Right.
KB, what was your favorite thing about writing A Pale Light in the Black?
Oh, like practically everything, to be honest. I was still writing the Fairy and War trilogy when I agreed to write these books for Harper Voyager, because essentially what happened was the editor at Harper Voyager, David Pomrico, messaged my agent, was like, hey, I want to talk to KB about a project. They have to sign a non-disclosure form. And I'm like, really? Well, that's enough to get me interested and see what's going on. And so then when we actually sat down and talked about it, it was such an intriguing idea. Like, he had the basic idea of a Space Coast Guard and the boarding games. Past me was like, yeah, I can do 2 books a year and work a full-time job. That's fine. Future me had a lot of words to say that weren't particularly kind about that decision, but I don't regret it. However, I had just finished up Down Among the Dead, which is the second book in the Fairy and War trilogy, and it's a relatively brutal book on a number of levels. And so it took a lot out of me. This was 2019, like early 2019. Personal life was rough. Everything was rough, right? And so then the schedule was so tight that I basically stopped, like finished writing that, turned it in, and immediately jumped into this book. With like very little idea of what was going to happen. I had started pulling names and ideas, and David and I had talked about like the boarding games and what they should maybe look like and what we could use in regards. I think at that point, the only thing I had was the Neo G name, which was like my brainchild, and I'm still super proud of the idea to call them the Near Earth Orbital Guard. But so I just sat down and started writing. And yeah, Jinx is an incredibly easy character to write. Like, once we got going, she was like, okay, let me tell you a story about the first time I met my best friend. And so, yeah, I loved everything about it. My 2 absolute favorite scenes, though, are the rescue scene where Max rescues Jinx just after the prelims, and then Jinx's final fight with TiVo at the very end. And the like first introduction of TiVo is like a close second too, because it was just so much fun. You can all thank my partner for the fact that TiVo didn't turn out to be like evil bad Russian guy in the thing, because that was my like I was debating, like, do I make him nice? Do I make him jerk? How am I gonna play this? And I just asked Dawn, and Dawn was like, no, make him a good guy. Let's see what happens. Like, what happens if there's a Navy good guy in this whole situation? And I'm like, well, now we know what happens. So yeah, it was honestly a breath of fresh air to write, and it's been super gratifying to have people tell me that it is such a breath of fresh air to read,
Mhm.
especially because it came out in March of 2020. So it was sort of suffered a lot of the same fates as a lot of pandemic books, in that it fell under the, oppressive weight of everything else that was happening. But I got a number of messages from people who were like super pleased and just so relieved to have something of that tone to read and to get them through.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that actually like totally leads me to my second question too. Do we think sci-fi is going towards like more hopeful, less dark and twisty, or less like dystopian futures, and more okay, like let's look at what happens past the dystopia, or what happens with technology, where we're heading towards, how can we use things. Like one of the things that really caught my eye as I was reading, I kind of both read and listened to it, was this whole idea that we basically have this near orbital Earth Coast Guard that's like, they're military ranks, and it's kind of like that idea of like policing the galaxy, but not really. Like when we don't have like any of these issues of that we're dealing with today regarding either police forces or military forces. Like that's not really very much an issue here. Like someone, I kind of like skimmed through some Goodreads reviews too, and someone kind of called it like a low angst sci-fi. I'm wondering if that's kind of, do we think that that's where we're heading in sci-fi? Is there is that kind of where our current like zeitgeist is taking us, or what are your thoughts on that?
I hope so. And I say that, and then I'm like, well, the new project that I'm working on with my agent is like very much dystopian and terrible. And so I don't know, who knows if it'll see the light of day one way or the other. But I think there's a time and a place for both kinds of stories. And I know this is a conversation that's happened in the queer community a lot, especially like the idea that like for so long we didn't have stories with happy endings. We didn't have like traditionally good or hopeful stories. And so there's a lot of pressure to kind of write those kind of stories, but like the full spectrum of human emotion and engagement and experience is that there are like terrible things that we still have to deal with. So I don't know. I do think like right now is definitely I tend to gravitate towards the stories. There's oh shoot, I should have written down the name of that book. There's a new book coming out here soon by Ren Hutchins. And hang on, let me grab it because I think it's Under Fortunate Stars. Under Fortunate Stars, which it comes out May 10th. And I got a chance to read it early, and it is just the most delightful, hopeful book about people trying to save themselves. Essentially, it's a great like time paradox story, and it was like exactly what I needed to read. So
I think sometimes we need that. Adam, what are your thoughts, like maybe both in the fantasy and sci-fi spaces, because I feel like that's kind of where some trends overlap.
And I don't really know where things are headed or what we're doing. I do feel like I hope we also get that side of the spectrum in terms of storytelling, and not just like the dark, gritty aspect. I think the wider the spectrum becomes in terms of our stories, just the richer the genre is, the richer literature is, and ultimately just our lives.
Yeah. And feel free, if anyone else has any like current trends that they're seeing, feel free to chime in if there's anything. Also, I always encourage people like for book recommendations. So Ren's book I'm super excited about. I've been following them for a while, so
it's so good.
Be really good. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely like kind of here for that whole breadth of, okay, yeah, like, authors that write like the equivalent of grimdark, but also, okay, but there's hope. And this is kind of where we're heading. I think like, I mean, we had that whole phenomenon. We were kind of like touching on video games earlier, but like Animal Crossing just being so phenomenally popular in 2020 because we just all needed that little like, I mean, yeah, it's capitalism and colonialism, but I just want my cute little island and make it adorable and actually, afford my house and things like that. Like I think a lot of these things definitely kind of come up in that.
I think maybe one of the interesting aspects of this, well, I write science fiction romance and paranormal romance. So that whole romance thing has to have a happy ending or it's not a romance. So I think that's such a big part of the market. I think that's kind of moving into with the more encouraging, the more happy endings. I also like the Coast Guard because the Coast Guard is not one of the military groups that we often think of, but and they mostly combat the elements, not other countries or other people. So I thought that was intriguing to envision that as actually becoming part of the Space Force.
Without calling it Space Force. We could have been called the Space Force. I'm like, oh God, thank you.
I did get it. I did get a Space Force.
That was small letters.
That was one of the weirdest like professional moments to date, is that like as we were working on this, I think right before it came out or maybe right after it came out was when the whole Space Force thing like started to really explode. And then like I got several emails from my publisher and from my PR people like, hey, will you write a rebuttal to Ted Cruz or whoever it was, like talking about why the Space Force is like sort of a ridiculous idea? Or that was like, how did I end up in this world in this particular timeline? Because I'm not sure. So somewhere there's an article afloat. I don't know if it ever like got published somewhere, but I wrote a whole like essay about the Space Force and why
Like,
why it's not necessary.
That's awesome. It's like sometimes it's just like really like real life. It's like, wait, this is a thing in here. Yeah. So in terms of technology, since like this isn't really like something that is super specifically addressed, but obviously like this is sci-fi, obviously there are things that are like really central to the plot here, like Life X and how that works, and like all of the Comtech world travel, things like that. Where do we think like, and maybe like you can also comment on this, KB, on what current tech kind of inspired the tech that you were using in the book, and like how are we getting from our current tech to maybe something that's closer to the tech Neo G uses. I mean, we kind of dropped like lots of Star Trek references already, but it's kind of interesting how now we have a lot of that tech, right, that was initially totally out of people's like realistic scope, that is now like, oh yeah, we have communicators. Oh yeah, like, I mean, we have Cass here who wrote I remember like your article on how the transporter would actually work, and like how this would be horrifying. It would definitely not be like a chill ride from here to there. So there are obviously some things that are probably like less probable in terms of what's actually possible, but yeah, like where are we going with this? Do you want to kind of start with what inspired some of the tech that you were using? Was this kind of like a brainstorming effort with your editor, or was it mostly like coming from your own brain and kind of figuring out like the what ifs behind that?
You know, it was sort of a mix. David and I talked about it quite a bit. And I'm trying to like think, sometimes dredging up like the memory of How did this happen? I don't
Yeah.
know. It was a panic. I do know, I can tell you, like, the reason we settled on wormholes for transport rather than faster than light drives is because I'd used faster than light drives in the Hale Bristol books. And so I was like, people just change this. But also because, like, from a technology standpoint, while we have theoretical faster than light drives, the power requirements are such that it's untenable.
Mhm.
As far as what we could logically create scientifically in the next 400 years, the idea of learning how to make wormholes or even finding wormholes that we could then corral is like wildly more realistic,
Mhm.
which is to say it's still probably impossible, but between that and faster than light travel,
Mhm.
it's definitely something that's more logical. We also, they have near in the Neo G books, they have like close to FTL. It's just not quite FTL, which is how they get through the solar system, from point A to from Jupiter to Earth and back again without it taking so long.
Mhm.
Is the use of helium as a fuel source. So yeah, we kind of just mishmash stuff together, and like Nancy had said, I'm hard sci-fi has its time and place. I
Mhm.
know a lot of people who really enjoy it. I find the science fascinating. When I'm writing and reading books, I don't care. Like, I don't bless you, David Weber, I don't need 80 pages about how your freaking
Yeah.
star drive works. Like, I just want to know what Otter Harrington is doing. That's my focus is, and likely will always be, on the characters and what the characters are doing, because in my mind, at the end of the day, the humanity of the characters is what's driving the story. It's not it's not the life X, it's not the drive, it's not anything else. As far as the life X goes, I had a lot of fun researching like algae and figuring out like the uh the role that the B vitamins play in our aging process and stalling the aging process. Also the like the two major roadblocks to us going to space and staying in space for a long time right now are beyond the gravity issue, which 90% of people are like, we're just not even going to talk about that.
Mhm.
Let's just all pretend we figured out how to make anti-grav stuff and go with it. Is the radiation problem and the lack of salt available in the universe. And the salt thing I have like driven into a completely other storyline for a whole other world, but the radiation problem and like the degradation of the telomeres because of that radiation is something that can actively be solved in our lifetime, I think, if we focus on it and figure out how to actually do it. So yeah, and it's those sort of things. We're obviously, the people in the Neo G are working like at a massive deficit because they lost a lot of the tech and they lost a lot of the stuff in the collapse. So it's slightly even more impressive that they managed to like pull themselves up out of that and somehow go ahead and continue out into the stars.
So you mentioned your algae research. Rachel was actually asking this when she sent me like one of her thoughts of because she's like, hey, I really liked the red algae situation, because I guess there's a research paper about red algae or algae being used as a life extension for wildfires. I was like, hey, did this influence this at all, or was this part of your research, or was it coincidence?
I might have read it, in all honesty. Like I said, I have no memory of like what got read through in that like the 6 months up to writing Neo G, A Pale Light in the Black,
Mhm.
while I was trying to write another book and I was doing research for this book at the same time. I feel like that was probably one that had maybe come up, but I'd have to actually look at the paper, I think, before my brain was like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you read some of that. So yeah.
Yeah.
I was also looking for, like, I had a specific location in mind for the like evil base. And so I wanted to make sure that like when I was looking at the various kinds of algae and deciding like what had actually survived through the like climate change disaster, what areas would be safer. And that's kind of how we ended up where we did.
Mhm. That's cool. Yeah, what was the collapse like in general? Like it kind of seems like the book's hinting at this was an extinction event. Was it like ecological? Is there like a fully fleshed out backstory to it, or is it kind of like, are you dropping some hints so that people can kind of puzzle together their own, like, oh, this is probably what happened. This is probably what the collapse was.
You know, there's a little bit of both. the terrible answer is we're living it.
Yeah.
Like most of 2020, and I was just, somebody messaged me, like sent me an email, I think late last year, and was like, thanks for actually mentioning the plague. And I was like, that was not intentional. Like
Yeah.
I wrote that book before the plague happened.
Yeah.
I did
This is
not
how
want the
publishing
plague
works,
to,
and whoops.
like, did not want that to actually be something that happened. Although Jenks makes a joke now here in the upcoming third book about horse dewormer and about horse dewormers, and she actually says the first plague, I think, which I was like,
Oh,
dear
no.
God, okay.
But also, I mean, that just makes sense in terms of how history works. So
basically,
like,
so yeah, in essence, the collapse was a like massive cascade failure of like climatological, geopolitical, everything, just for like one thing after another. That's like, we're seeing some of the climate change, the storms started getting worse, and then the plague started happening, and then countries started to fall apart. And so you can see where I'm like, please stop. Like,
NATO what now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just, nobody stopped it, and until it was far too late for them. And that's like, we're talking relatively major. I don't remember if there's any numbers ever mentioned, but they were looking at like, if I ever sat down and wrote like an actual like biography or timeline of what was happening, we're talking about like probably close to 70% of the world's population, human wise, and upwards of like 80% of the like the rest of the living population, animals, plants, that sort of thing. So and then they the best thing about Jenks is I treated it much like the fact that this book takes place about 400 years in the future from the point of like when the collapse was happening, which is a period of about 100 or so years. And Jenks, to me, always plays the part with her obsession with 21st century memes, as that one friend that you have who is like so deep in the Black Plague and knows everything about what happened in that time period and could rattle off like 600 different things about it. And the rest of us we know what the Black Plague is. We're aware of that time period and sort of know like some of the details, but we're not quite so deep into it as somebody like Jenks would be. So yeah, that was how her like little meme thing came about. And it's been a lot of fun though, like trying to pull semi-relevant memes and having a lot of discussions with David where he's like, I don't get this. I'm like, yes, but somebody else will. So
hey, is this still around? I mean, it's kind of interesting too how like I feel like Doge, again, very 2013, but then also like now we're talking Dogecoin. It's like, okay. Like, thanks, meme, and like the weird immortal life of internet culture.
Yeah, it's gonna
Mhm,
it's gonna come back around at
mhm.
some point.
Yeah, also like drinks kind of definitely gave me like yeah, ADHD slash hyper focus vibes. I'm like, oh yeah, this is your hyper focus slash special interest. I totally get that.
Yeah.
It's definitely really like the understated rep too, where it's like, oh yeah, I can see that aspect here without having to put like a label on it. um what do we all feel about like the whole idea of since like in terms of the collapse and the extinction event, everything that the Neo Geos and the characters around them use is like called synth, right? Like it's like synth coffee, synth this. um are we headed that way? And if so, like where we're at? And I mean, and like KB, you already said this, like we're basically living the collapse. Like I feel like that's, we're all like very aware of that. I guess the question to the wider panel is this something that's like a foregone conclusion, or do we feel like maybe the outlook is a bit more hopeful, where we can like maybe still course correct some things, maybe we can still like prevent some of these total losses from happening? How do we feel about this? Adam, I'm gonna pick on you.
Can pick on me. I do feel like that's like maybe the current that's sweeping over the world is like we as a species, I guess, we're trying to figure out how to mass produce things. And as we do, I feel like things get more and more synthetic. But then there's always sort of this pushback counterculture to that, is like we like homegrown, like farm raised, like natural food, and it is better for us for the most part. That there is always like a pushback and attention, and which is great because as like storytellers, because that's what will create story for us, and give us different point of views. And I'm all, as a reader and a writer, I'm always more interested in raising interesting questions than providing answers. And I think this is an interesting question to me.
I think in general, also like the whole idea of where do plants like go, right? I mean, Max mentions like the greenhouse on Jupiter, like the lungs of the place. It's like, okay, yeah, like obviously, like we need to make survival possible somehow. And while we can produce and mass produce and synthesize some things, like that's not necessarily true for all the things. And then obviously things like also happen, like the whole Life X mystery that was like, oh, yeah, there are obviously people who already feel like, hey, Earth is overpopulated, and then expanding that to the galaxy, like what's the next conclusion here? But yeah, any other thoughts on this?
You know, I mean, I'd like to have hope that we will figure out some way to reverse this, or at least stall it enough till we get to the point where we can convince, you know, the larger I mean, essentially we're looking at the governments and the corporations who are responsible for this. That's, you can, your personal responsibility only goes so far, in that, you know, I can recycle all the plastic that I want, or even not buy plastic to start with. It doesn't change the fact that the US military is the biggest polluter on the planet, right? So the change has to happen from the top. And you know, we're kind of stuck in that capitalist mindset where it's not necessarily going to. I mean, and I'm trying to think of like synthetically, like, I mean, the shift, like Adam was talking about, you know, a lot of us like to eat closer to home and make a serious effort to do that. And the logistics of doing that on a mass scale, right, is obviously sort of why mass produced stuff starts popping into the system, and why we started, you know, especially right around World War II and in the years directly after, where mass produced, mass marketed things came into the home and really started like being pushed. And then, that cascades into people working longer hours, so they don't have time to, go to the local butcher to buy stuff. It's a much easier stop to go to your Walmart and pick up everything you need there than to make 6 trips after
Yeah.
work.
I think
Energy too.
one of the interesting things throughout history, the people that have gotten fed up with the system have always had another place to go. I mean, the New World, and now we're so late on doing anything about getting off of this planet that I don't know what's going to happen with the people that want something better. Now they're going to have to do something about here, I guess. I hope. There's good things and bad things with that. I don't know what the answer is, but I just have always been struck that there's always been a stopgap. There's always been a way to relieve the pressure in a way.
It's like, yeah, we're literally running out of space and resources and Earth. I mean, we're seeing this right now with what's going on with our energy prices, right? We have people, it's really funny, like being originally from Germany, I currently am watching a lot of German news just because it's really interesting to see how obviously like the energy crisis is really hitting them very, very much closer to home, while the US is still like in that position of, oh, we have a cushion, like we're in a position where, yeah, we complain about gas prices, but we also have like some of the most gigantic cars that are absolutely impractical in Europe or elsewhere. So it's kind of like almost a way to see like where the larger world is headed, and to see like where different parts of the world are trying to kind of figure this out, but also where we have like, yeah, like systemic issues that just need to be addressed, and people are like definitely like flailing with this. It's like, oh, like how do we deal with the situation? Clearly we don't agree with what's happening, but at the same time we also want to like de-escalate at the same time. Is that possible while not involving ourselves? I think like, again, as sci-fi writers and readers, I think we see a lot of these questions in literature and books, but also just in life around us, just kind of crop up. Like it always personally fascinates me when people go like, oh, why do all of your books right now have to be so political? And it's like, show me one piece of sci-fi and fantasy that isn't political. So yeah, I don't know, Kiwi, can you comment on that with like the Neo G books, or maybe your books in general, since I mean, like you, like that's very much what you do, right? Is like include like so many things that are clearly like what's going on right now. Have you experienced any like pushback as an author, or any issues with that at all, or has it been like mostly positive, people's receptions?
At least to my face, it's been mostly positive. So I don't read reviews, and I don't go on like Goodreads and stuff. So I don't know if people are like talking shit about it, and that's fine. If I'm like, they're entitled to their opinion. When David and I started developing this idea early, one of the first things he said to me was the readership for military science fiction tends to skew towards the conservative. Me being me, heard that and was like, okay, so what you're saying is I should like go all in, make it as queer as possible, make it as liberal as possible. Like how many things can I layer in here to essentially build, like a Star Trek type of utopian idea where, I mean, shit's not perfect, right? But they live in a world where like relationships are respected and pronouns are respected, and if people are going to be jerks about stuff, they're being jerks about other things rather than that type of thing. And a large part of that was just because I wanted to write a world where that was not going to be an issue. I set out immediately that any conflict between Max and Jenks that happened wasn't going to be because like I don't know, they were like vying for the same guy, right? So I can immediately fix that problem. You know, or even that Jenks is mad at Max because you know, Max has taken her brother's place. Like that wasn't the actual issue. It was the much more seated and gave me an opportunity to dive into Jenks's character, where she's, you know, she's afraid of loss, she's afraid of being abandoned, she's afraid of things changing, which is, you know, in large part why she does a lot of the things that she does, why she gets into fights so that she won't get promoted, you know, or gets busted back down to petty officer. And she learns along the way, right, to like not, that this is, she doesn't have to do that, that it's going to be okay. And yeah, so I haven't gotten any pushback. What I have gotten is some a number of really lovely comments and emails from readers, and also a couple of really surprising ones from people who were like, I did the one that I remember, some guy messaged me and who specifically had to tell me that he was like a voting Republican. And I'm like, okay, dude, good for you. Like, but and also had to specifically tell me that I did a much better job than Scalzi at like not like inputting politics into my stuff. And I'm like,
did they
you
read the same book?
like, hey, are you sure you're talking about my book? Because like, yeah, Scalzi and I are very much on the same page as far as like politics goes and talking about politics. The only difference is I haven't pissed off like some very major people in the like troll community. But yeah, it was interesting because he really enjoyed it. And my own father, who is also a voting Republican, at least at the moment, is, you know, it like absolutely loves my books, and adores Jenks, and thinks that he's like Max, which is hilarious to the rest of the family. You know, that I think has had his eyes opened to certain things, you know, that just wouldn't occur to a like cis straight male from the Midwestern United States who grew up on a, you know, grew up out in the farmland and was a farmer for his, you know, like 60 years. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride, and it continues to be. And I was talking to my agent the other day, and he gave me a really lovely compliment about my I guess representation, or you know, that my demographic has become relatively solidly like, these are the people, the queers that I like, this is who I talk, you know, not for but to, and this is who I want to have stories to read, you know, because we spent our whole lives not having those stories and having to read other stories, and, you know, either kind of maneuvering your way around them in a way that made you feel better, or just ignoring it entirely because it was too painful to deal with. And so that's where I'm sitting, and I'm really happy with the choices that I've made as far as my writing goes for that.
Yeah, instead of construing all the subtext, it's just like, no, it's just text. It's there.
I'm like, yeah, no, I was talking to somebody else, and they were like, I think I'm not up on this, but one of these characters isn't in a poly relationship. And I was like, yes, dear, that's Jake.
I feel like there are several. I was like, wait a minute.
I'm like, there's a lot of like around the thing, but if you're looking at the main like flag waver, that would be our girl. So yeah,
it's like I actually really loved how Jenks and Lewis had this whole conversation. It's like, hey, you know what? I really like you, and you know what I'm happy with what makes you happy. So if dating other people and sleeping with other people makes you happy, cool. I'm like, thanks for putting compersion on the page, like without using that label of like, oh, that's a thing in polyamorous relationships. Like we don't need to necessarily explain that in sci-fi, but it's like, hello, that's what compersion means. It's like your partner is happy with what makes their partner happy, even though that might not be the same thing that they're pursuing in their romantic life. Like that was
Yeah.
really, really cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And that, I mean, Jenks's and Lewis's relationship was not like evident to me in the initial stages of that writing. In fact, we got all the way to the prelims and he was suddenly like, I love you. And I'm like, where did this come from? Me and Jenks had about the same reaction, like, holy shit, not prepared for this. Then we had to go back. I had to go back and layer a bunch of stuff in at the beginning of the book to make that not come quite so out of the blue. But yeah, I love that because it was an opportunity to put stuff like that on the page, even knowing that the kind of relationship that they've obviously had these conversations before. So yeah.
That's actually my next question for like the panel as a whole and the book club as a whole is what are everyone's favorite relationships in this book, since it is such a character and relationship and family driven book that has like so much diversity in what family means and how we interact with different families as well, but both like families and relationships. What are some of your favorites? Adam?
I was just making sure I wasn't muted.
No, you
for me, I feel like by the time I was approaching the end of the book and Max, she's offered this chance to sort of betray her given family at the same time that her chosen family is like coming to rescue her, really kind of hit home for me just like what a family is and what it means. And there's no real one definition because every family is different, but in terms of like being queer and having queer representation on the page, and just highlighting this very tight-knit, loving, chosen family was just something that I really liked and I really appreciated and I really just resonated with. So that was definitely like my favorite, just like the group of the ship, the ghost. It starts with that.
Zuma's ghost.
Zuma. Okay. Their family dynamics and relationship was my favorite.
Yeah, I personally really actually loved how because Max is kind of introduced as this like awkward character who kind of doesn't really know how she fits into the team, and then when she's having that conversation with Jenks about like romantic interests and she's like, yeah, I just nope, like this is not how I tick, and I'm like, yeah, asexual rep, like was really here for that. Again, like I really like how like we're clearly seeing these characters but we're not necessarily like using labels. Like I don't know, like I had a conversation with someone today about labels and how labels can be really, really empowering if they're chosen, but really oppressive if given. So I feel like that's also like kind of a family thing. Like it's like what you choose, and like with labels, that's similar. So sometimes I think this was a really good example of where we don't always like need labels. But then we also have like Max's relationship with Nika, where it's like clearly like, oh, like, yeah, like we don't really know how to define this. Like we're friends, like there might be more, but it's also like, well, what means more anyway? Like, it's like that idea of where she's like, okay, this might sound stupid, but I really like your brain. And I'm like, hello, demisexual person. I feel that as a, like, when you're trying to define to others, like, okay, sorry, I don't have a type. Like if this person's brain is terrible, like, no, like they can be super pretty and it doesn't matter. Like, I think there's a lot of space in sci-fi to kind of layer in these types of things. So I really enjoyed that. Wider panel, any other relationships or characters that really stood out to you?
Step and just say I agree with what Adam said, that some of the chosen, if you want to use that word, people in my family are some of my favorites. So
yeah, I feel like, I don't know, KB, like this might be, I haven't read like completely all of your books, but it seems like found family is definitely a theme in what you do. I mean, like
flashing.
Fields.
Yeah. I am it sounds so like weird and pretentious to be like, I am a student of the human condition. But the things that truly like catch my eye, and the things that I really constantly find myself drawn to and exploring in my writing, is both the connect and the disconnect between us. Right, the ways that we are drawn to other people in our lives, the things that tear us apart, how grief affects us through that whole scenario. In there's no spoilers in this comment, but in Hold Fast Through the Fire, which, and all of the Neo G books are kind of written so that people can pick them up at any point. They don't have to read them in order. They are sort of chronologically in order, but each story is self-contained, and we tried to keep them to a point where you could reasonably pick it up, and you might be like, huh, that sounds like a good story. What what was that all about? And then you realize, oh, I could read all about that in the previous book. But you're not going to get completely lost. The Hold Fast Through the Fire deals quite a bit with like some trauma, like PTSD and past trauma and grief, and people learning how to live with their grief. So yeah, but above all, it's probably a little bit strange because my family is relatively close, probably more close comparatively to a lot of other families. Like we all generally get along, we all talk to each other, right? I managed to live with my parents for 6 months without I think we only had 2 big fights, so which is a relatively good record. And there's not, they're all, my parents are lovely. They've been extremely accepting of all of us our whole lives for everything that we have tried to pursue or become, like no matter what it is. My mother is famous for telling like all of my friends and everybody else, like, well, if your parents are terrible, come to my house. So I grew up in a really solid, stable, like environment with a good, kind, loving family, and yet I am very, very interested in those situations where people come together and make their own families, because I'm sort of doubly blessed in that I have like a really good group of friends that functions that same way as a found family. So it's definitely one of those things that will continue to show up and has like shown up sort of repeatedly. That I had somebody comment, they were doing a reread of the Hale Bristol books, and they commented about how rereading Behind the Throne, which is the first book, how shocking and somewhat terrible it was that nobody was touching Hale, except to like direct her places or protect her. Versus like towards the end of the second trilogy where there's a lot of touching and a lot of hugging and a lot of I promised people hugging and then I had to follow through on it. But it all develops relatively naturally, and through that you see this progression of this woman who is dragged home and doesn't want to be there and doesn't trust anybody, and through that comes and finds this family, when she's lost basically her whole family, of people that she can trust and people who love her and who care about her, and that sort of thing. So it was fun because it was not an entirely conscious decision on my part, but it apparently made its way onto the page anyway. So
That's really cool.
yeah.
I also really feel like, I don't know, this is something like very quintessentially queer, where it's like, yeah, obviously, like I feel like every queer writer that I know, myself included, is like just obsessed with found families because they're just so important to so many of us.
Yeah. As a side note, my favorite character relationship is actually Jenks and at the Admiral, who's dear God, Hoboynes. I was like, I just forgot his name. Yeah, Jenks and Vice Admiral Hoboynes like have one of the best absolutely best relationships. And it is hysterical in their like his complete exasperation with her because he knows that she can do so much more. And she's just like, yeah, I'm not even gonna like good luck, sir. But it's not gonna happen.
It's like she's like that student who's just like, yeah, I know I could just apply myself, but I choose not to, and you will respect my agency. I'm really excited about book 2. I'm totally going to pick that up next, but looking at the blurb and I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna go well. Jenks getting promoted.
No, I have a gunny sergeant in the Marines who's a friend of mine now, and he was like, I can't. He had a really hard time picturing Jenks as a senior NCO. I was like, well, she does manage it, but I said it's fun, so watch out for that one.
Oh yeah, that I guess that was also another question that kind of came up for me is like, do you have any background or connection to like military? Is it mostly like research, input from friends, or because I always like, I don't know, this is kind of maybe like more personally where I'm like always a little bit intimidated by military sci-fi because I'm like, oh, like I remember moving to the US and just going like, yeah, it's all the army, right? And they're like, no, you're wrong. These are all the branches. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry, German, like we're not super militarized anymore. Culturally
like,
conditioned kind of against this.
There was a whole rule about that.
Yeah, I like really pissed some people off and I'm like, I am so sorry. Ignorance, sorry.
Only the jerks get pissed off about it. The rest, everybody else laughs about it. Even the people who were in the military. I was actually just talking to a new friend of mine who is she's a Army vet, and her boyfriend is a Marine vet. And she actually called him a crayon eating something, and I just died because I was like, the crayon joke about there's a long running like in service joke about Marines eating crayons as a like an indicator of not that they're not super intelligent. And I was like, the crayon joke is like one of the best jokes that I've ever heard. And even Marines are like, oh yeah, like, well,
yeah, this is a thing.
You know. So I have zero military training myself. I have a very weird tangential association with like practically every branch of the military. My partner was in the Air Force for 12 years. My grandfather was in the Army Corps of Engineers. I have several cousins who were both Marines and Navy and Air Force. And then I have a number of friends across the way. I mean, part of that is I lived in Colorado Springs for like 10 years. So we have 3 military bases in the area. And so you tend to sort of pick all of that stuff up by association when you live like in that culture. So that's, yeah, I have a lot of resources that I can reach out to and ask for help with stuff, and terminology and stuff like that. That's super helpful. But it can, in fact, yeah, be super intimidating if you are like from the outside, and some of that stuff. Yeah, some of that stuff seems very weird, but it's just something that's kind of floated around the edges of my life, my entire life. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense then. Okay, I wanted to make sure that I definitely am opening things up for questions from others here. So yeah, do any of you have any questions for either the whole panel or just KB, or yeah. Sorry, my cat is currently sabotaging my monitor. Apparently napping behind it is a great idea.
Yeah, right now. I have to do it right now.
I'd like to just go back for a minute. I heard the crayon thing from a different thing. Supposedly, this is a joke. Somebody was sorting scholarship applications and or was all the applications for scholarships. Okay. And she said, oh, I always know which ones to go to the athletic department because they're written in crayon. That's kind of trashy, but
wow.
It's essentially the same thing though. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, jokes, always shift from if it's a good joke, you can switch it from this country to that country to another country, and you just change the names. And
Yep, different divisions. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, if we don't have questions coming in general, Kiwi, I'm kind of wondering about your like writing process. Like, was writing like the Neo G books very different since you basically picked up like your editor's idea, but it sounds like it wasn't like a like preset world. It sounds like you had a lot of room in there. And yeah, like how did you approach this? Are you more of a plotter, a pantser, an in-betweener? What does this look like for you? And what did it look like specifically, like writing these, I guess, prior to 2020 and dealing with like a 2020 release?
My writing style is best described as organized chaos. I think like I write outlines when I am forced to. The schedule being what it was, because I wrote so many books in such a short time span. A lot of times it was just like writing as fast as I possibly could, and scrambling to come up with stuff like as we went. I mean, when I sold the Farian War to Orbit, it was like, here's what we're going to write about. And then it didn't really turn out like the way we thought it was going to. And so that's kind of been just like, I throw stuff at the wall until it sticks. It's sort of nice to have a little bit more time and a little bit more brain space to actually sit down and plot stuff out better. But I had something else there. Man, that just went.
I feel you.
That just went with Aloy into the Forbidden West, and we're gone. So yeah, I mean, well, I wrote an entire outline for Ghosts of Trappist. And then when I finally sat down to write it in September of last year, I was like, I know what's in the outline. And I just started writing, and I got like 30,000 words into it. And then finally looked at the outline. It was like, oh, it was not what was in the outline. We're just going to roll with it. It'll be fine. We'll fix it later. But I did manage to kind of circle back around, and we got stuff sorted. So, but yeah, like overall, I tend to have, I have a great deal of admiration for people who can like do those super heavy outlines. That's like, 70,000 words of a 140,000 word novel. And then all they have to do is fill in the other bits.
Yeah, that's like a zero draft.
Basically, that's it. That's essentially what my zero drafts usually look like. And yeah, it's a block for me sometimes, because I'm like, if I'm gonna write that detailed an outline, my brain's like, all right, we're done, story's told.
yeah, right, yeah.
Like, we're not gonna deal with this anymore. So yeah, my outlines tend to contain a lot of, and then something blew up and we'll fix it somehow. Nobody knows how. Who knows? We'll
figure out the science, technology, and everything as we go.
Yeah. Well, and I when I write, I often play the game of just giving the characters their lead and being like, do what you want, and then I get super excited when something cool happens. Especially when you put Jenks on the page, then you usually just have to sit back and watch the chaos and clean up you just write the after action report. Everything's fine. I find that I get stories kind of to play themselves out a little bit better when I do that. But I do almost always tend to have like a pretty basic idea of like, here's what we want, here's point A, here's point B, here's how we want this book to end. I don't fight it too hard though when I'm looking at like, if you come up on something and you're like, oh, that's going to take me in a completely different direction from how I thought this book was going to end. When I have the time, I will often like explore it. And if it doesn't work, then we'll go back to plan A. Or, I'll just follow it all the way through, and it ends up being like a much better solution than the original idea. So, yeah, things have not changed much. I've talked about this quite a bit. The funniest thing is when you write your first book, you have like all the freaking time in the world, right? I wrote Behind the Throne in like 3 months, but then I spent like 6 years like querying it and cleaning it up and revising it and sending it out and doing it all over again. So by the time we got published, like there wasn't a whole lot to do with edits. And then like after the Throne got written in 3 months and edited in 3 months and published, and it was like, wait a minute, what happened? Like I don't understand this, and it's been like that basically pretty consistently. I was talking to somebody on Twitter the other day that like a book a year seems like a pretty reasonable pace for people, and it's not. It is a brutal pace, and I can't even fathom the people who put out like 4 books a year or more.
Romance writers, I don't know how they do it.
It's murder, because you're not just like, you're writing the book and then you're editing the book and then you're copy editing the book and then you're past paging it, and in between that all you're trying to write another book usually, and maybe come up with something else, and doing events and writing stuff for other things and reading books for other people, which interrupts your flow. At least it does mine. Like I have to really set aside some dedicated time to read books for Blurb, because it throws me so for such a loop a lot of the times to get into somebody else's world. Same thing for like consuming other media. like Horizon Forbidden West came out at exactly the right time, because if I had tried to do this game like at any other point during this year, it would have completely ruined like the schedule that I had. Yeah. But now I have like the space and the time to kind of just indulge in that complete obsession for a little while, and then I can like hopefully let it settle and move on to what I'm working on. So yeah, that's like I'm still continually refining my process and how like my actual writing. So it'll be interesting to see like how this 4th book for the Neo G goes, and like I've got my outline. We, David and I had a great talk. I could share the like basic idea, which is Die Hard in space.
Yes.
So
Here for it.
we're gonna put Max and Jenks on a spaceship with a bunch of bad guys and see what happens.
I am here for it.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. So yeah, like, and I'm looking forward to like this whole new basically life for myself, where I can like spend all of my time writing, and I don't have to devote it to a whole lot else besides feeding cats and making sure that they
defending the keyword from the cats and the writing chairs.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely that's How many Neo G books will there be? Is there like a cap for the series, or like a projected ending, or is it kind of like an open-ended thing right now?
You know what? It is pretty open-ended at the moment. We're the book that I'm writing this year is the last one that we have on contract. But I will be curious to see kind of what happens. And I mean, like all writers, I'm kind of hoping that it starts to take off. We're starting to hear and see a little bit more buzz about it, especially with both the idea of the series, which is, as we've mentioned a couple of times, very much like Star Trek-y, and very like, I would totally be stoked about the idea of like collaborating or having other authors come in and write in the world. And so that's sort of how we've set everything up to work. And that's the easy answer. Because there is no overarching series plot line for these books. There is just like self-contained stories. We can do pretty much anything we want, and we don't have any kind of like end date in mind.
That's really cool. It's a little bit I think like people have like definitely drawn comparisons to Becky Chambers' A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and her like Wayfarer series. It definitely gives me those vibes. Was that a like point of influence or inspiration, or was this just totally like random? Like you mentioned Star Trek definitely was like an inspiration for it. Were there some other either works of fiction or media that inspired what you did with this?
Dodgeball.
I was actually, yeah, I was wondering about the sports, like the layering that in. So I'm like, this is like dodgeball and kickboxing and
Yeah,
yeah.
the movie Dodgeball was like a huge influence, especially in the commentators for the events. Because that like the whole like interaction between the two guys who do the collar for the dodgeball tournament in the movie are hilarious. And I was like, I just wanted that kind of like fun vibe for it. We Goodness, what else? I had read, I cannot remember what time, like when. I'm pretty sure I read Becky's first book well before I started writing A Pale Light in the Black. And I did really enjoy it. Like I can't think of anything off the top of my head beyond that, like let's have a crew of people together who are become sort of found family thing that directly influenced that. And then see, what else did I was just talking about this with somebody too, like in terms of how my timeline went and how things like sort of got influenced, like we're able to kind of put that influence in. And I playing Dragon Age Inquisition, which I'm reasonably sure, I think I started playing it like in late 2018, early 2019, which is right when I was writing the book. And so that sort of same, like you'll see it again, like that the companions in that game are such like a merry band of found family, with some really excellent like side comments and stuff as you're running missions together, because BioWare tends to be pretty good at that type of stuff. So that I feel like that also had a particularly heavy influence on it. Yeah, other than that, I like the one thing that always sticks out is just that the pure fact that I wrote like this really dark, terrible book about a woman who was like slowly losing her grip on reality because of the grief that she was experiencing, and then like being able to come out of that and write this like super fun, slightly ridiculous, and yet still like kind of poignant and touching book was like just a relief for me and extremely cathartic. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with the boarding games. They have been a challenge in some aspects to kind of like get that through, but I've had a lot of people say the same thing that Nancy said, which is like that I don't care about sports and you somehow made me care about sports. Like I don't know how that happened. I'm like,
I'm wondering if the way around this, because I was kind of questioning like myself there too. I'm like, I don't usually like read or follow any sports, but I think like maybe it was the way around that, like character interactions. I mean, like that's why we like are rooting for like Jenks' final fight and things like that. Like I feel like it just wouldn't have worked if you hadn't done all of the character buildups and if those character relationships weren't there.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, it's the focus is on the characters and not necessarily on, you know, the sports itself, although it's sort of fun. And that was it's been fun in the like successive books to kind of figure out some new and inventive ways to show the boarding games without like kind of doing that same like, let's go to the prelims and fight some fights and then let's go to the big games and you know, who's gonna win? We already know who's gonna win. How could they possibly lose? That sort of thing. So yeah,
it actually made me think of like animes like Yuri on Ice, where I'm like, I didn't know that I needed ice skating animes in my life, but
here we are.
Wonderful. And here we are obsessed. Like, wait, what happened? This is a sports thing. Oh, it's not a sports thing. It's just like that element that frames it.
Yeah.
Kaby, what do you do to fill the well? What do you do for just fun?
nothing. I'm
But now that qualifies. That is a thing.
Mhm.
right. I really am. I talk on my Twitter pretty consistently. I had a pretty bad case of burnout, basically starting in about 2020, where I I really struggled to get some books finished because of the pace that I was doing, and I had like no free time. I barely had any time to write. And so I have kind of made a really conscious effort to rework that. I've also been extremely lucky. Like I said, we sold our house down in the Springs, and because of that, I was able to quit my full-time like day job, and I've been making like pretty decent money off the writing to be able to like do that full-time now. So yeah, I've spent the last couple of months like kind of figuring out like what I actually want to do for fun, what I kind of want to do. I mean, I have something upwards of 70 plants, house plants that I take care of pretty consistently. And I am excited about summertime coming because it means that I'll get to like go kayaking and hiking and camping with friends and stuff that I just didn't have an opportunity to do before.
Mhm.
And then yeah, I've been playing a lot of video games, especially the last like 3 weeks. So
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's also such a good, like, it's almost kind of like a weird, like passive way to like fill the creative well too, to look at like how stories are being told in other media. Like
yeah.
any
And
RPGs are so good at that. It's like, wait.
yeah. And I, for all it's Guerrilla Games is not like at all blameless or faultless in terms of some of the problematic elements for both Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, but I remain both like in complete awe and more than a little pissed off at how good they are. Like the backstory and the way that they tell you the backstory without completely overloading you for this what is essentially a fully realized world in a what could be anywhere from I think the baseline for playing it straight through, if you're like really going fast and not like spending a lot of time hiding in bushes like I do,
Exploring.
yeah, running around doing side quests, is like a 60-hour game time play for the quest, like the main quest line. But like the fact that they put this like super multi-layered in-depth story into it, when I played Horizon Dawn for the first time, it completely blew me out of the water.
Mhm. People keep telling me I need to play this game. I'm also, I have to admit, I'm a terrible gamer. I'm so bad.
So bad. And
I need a YouTube channel that's like made by bad gamers for bad gamers, because like, especially anything open world, I just get really lost. I'm like, Google Maps, where am I going?
Where am I? No, they're so good. It's, you know what, I one of the reasons why I love their stuff too is because the accessibility in their games is like phenomenal. I mean,
That's awesome.
it's one of the few games I've played that they have a story mode and then an easy mode and then a normal mode and then like a hard mode and then a nightmare mode. So like you can reasonably play on the completely like down like the bottom level, and it is like a bottom level. It's not them saying this is easy and
That's
then
the
you're
gaming
like,
experience I
yeah.
want.
No, and they have, it's extremely like, you can actually set it so it like really does tell you, like it's guided. Like it's like, hey, let's go this way, you know.
Like here.
Yeah, although my constant joke is that the guided map wants to put you on the road, and this is not a game where you want to be on the road because you will get killed if you're just walking along on the road. You really kind of want to be like out in the territories and stuff. So I told somebody else that I was talking to the other day that I felt like Horizon Zero Dawn especially is probably one of the best like entry games for people who who are not gamers and who kind of want to do it but are a little intimidated by it, because I have found all of the mechanics have been really good. Forbidden West felt like it was more challenging than Zero Dawn did in a number of aspects. And especially their like climbing function is a little like wonky. They're still debugging some stuff. And so there was a lot of times where I was like, I am not having fun.
It's like,
I'm going to put this down and walk
nothing.
away from it. But yeah, like overall, there are some things that could use work on it still, but it's such a fabulous game, both from a gameplay and from a narrative standpoint.
That's really good to know. I'm definitely always interested in looking at storytelling across other media, because I feel like as writers, we spend so much time with words, like whether it's written words or podcasts and audio. It's interesting to see like that obviously translated in other media as well.
And I love reading, like I love watching. I don't watch a lot of TV and I don't watch a lot of shows because my attention span is just such that it's hard to really focus on it. But the two that really have struck me in the last 2 years is the Chinese wuxia drama, The Untamed. That is it's available on Netflix and Amazon, I think. And it's just phenomenal. Both from a non-Western story standpoint, which I always encourage writers that Western story structure is very, very rigid and very like fixed in like our culture and how we view the world. And it can make things incredibly predictable a lot of times. Even I was reading, that's I think Becky's newest novella.
The To Be Taught If Fortunate.
No,
no.
Psalm for the Wild Bill, which is freaking gorgeous, and not at all like Western narrative, like story structure.
I need to pick that up.
Yes, and it was
like
great.
She's on my auto-buy list at this point too. I'm like, yeah, I'll like read anything
like
about
Traveling T-Monk and Robot. It was just, it's beautiful. But I spent the whole book like waiting for something terrible to happen, and nothing terrible ever happens. So I'm like, I'm gonna give you that gift right now. Like when you read it, it's not Western. There's not a point of conflict in that sense. And I did love that because I felt like The Untamed really gave that like a good solid voice. The other like piece of visual media that just tore me apart was the Netflix Arcane League of Legends series.
So good.
Oh my god.
I've never even played it, and it's just so good.
Me either. Never even played it. Had no idea what it was about. Like just started watching it because a couple of other people were talking about it, and the animation looked gorgeous. 3 episodes in, I'm like sobbing on my parents' couch, and everybody's like, "What are you watching?" And I'm like, "I have no idea," but it just completely broke me.
It's so good too, because you think like the story is going one way, and then it's just like, nope, just kidding. It's like, oh. And I used to be married to someone who was an avid League of Legends player, especially like when I think they had just like added Jinx to the narrative, and I was like, oh wait. Like my nerd cred does get excited about it.
Oh, I get this. Yeah. And like Don just pointed out in chat, like there's like the queer rep there is great too, with just the little interactions and Vi calling Caitlin Cupcake and all, but yeah, very unexpected stuff. And I always appreciate it when a story like shocks me, because it's so rare for it to do. Like that's kind of one of the hazards of being in this business, is that you start to be like, oh, I know what's going to happen. And so rarely are you completely confounded and surprised by that.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, we're almost hitting 8:30, so I kind of want to wrap up with everyone. So I really like to do book clubs where, and I used to run a Twitter chat that was like a queer spec-fic chat, and we would always wrap up with a book recommendation. So if you all like feel like KB has given us a lot of them, but maybe, if you can give us all a book recommendation and where we can find you online. And I'm gonna just kind of ask everyone who wants to chime in. Adam, let's start with you because I feel like I'm not, I haven't been picking on you as much as I probably should have.
Oh no, it's all good. So I mostly read nonfiction. I don't know why, I just devour it. It's really great. And Oprah just came out with a great new book called What Happened to You. She wrote with a neurologist and psychologist talking about how trauma affects your brain. And it's so informative and helpful and interesting that I've been recommending it to my friends already. So that would be my recommendation at this time. And I'm online. I'm taking a break from social media at the moment, but I'm on Instagram at Hey Adam Berg and Twitter at the Adam Berg, and that's where I am.
Awesome. Well, I'll give you one more, which is the book of poetry from Amanda Gorman, who did the inauguration speech or the inauguration poem for Biden's inauguration. And the book's called Call Us What We Carry. And it is like her poem at the inauguration, just completely full of beautiful imagery and words. And I just really loved it. So, wow, there goes my voice. I can be found at KB Wagers on Twitter. And on Instagram at Midway Brawler. If you go to KB Wagers on Instagram, you can also circle back around and find me. The Midway Brawler is my active account. The other one's just kind of a placeholder.
Yeah. I'm actually trying to think. I'm like, oh no. I'm like, I always ask people for book recommendations, and then I go like, oh wait, my mind is blank. But one really good one that I keep, it's an ongoing series, actually, speaking of storytelling that doesn't necessarily follow the same type of format, but one of my friends is an indie trans author, Cole McCade. He has this series called Criminal Intentions that's queer. It's kind of part police procedural, part mystery, part romance, and it's very, very slow burn and also very, very character focused. So while not touching on anything sci-fi at all, I would say sometimes it definitely has some horror undertones in terms of psychological things. It goes really into character relationships, and he structures his series like a TV show. So each season has 13 episodes, and each episode is really a novel. He's it's a novella. I'm like, dude, that's 80,000 words. That's a book. And he somehow managed to publish once a month for the first couple of seasons. And I don't know how he's still sane. And he's like, yeah, I'm kind of burned out right now. And I'm like, dude, stop apologizing. You published 26 books in 2.5 years. This is wild. But yeah, reminder to not measure yourself against others. I think I don't know how.
Holy moly.
I don't know about recommendations. I have virtually no social media. I have a website that I created about 2 years, but I've never really done anything with it because I don't have the time to keep updating it. So I've never started it, but it's under Leah Grand, which is, I guess, is going to be the pen name that I'm going to use one of these days. I don't know. I like to read all kinds of science fiction. I think one of my favorite series is Linnea Sinclair's Doc 5 series. And that's just, it's I guess it's a sci-fi. It's probably a romance, a sci-fi with romantic elements to it. I don't know. It eventually gets around to a happy ever after 3 or 4 books. So
awesome. Cool.
That's my story anyhow.
Sticking with it. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. Even though we were a small group, I feel like this was a really great discussion, and I'm sure a lot of people will watch the recording. We'll actually see KB for our prequels conference on April 23rd in Salt Lake at the UMOCA, the Utah Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. So super excited to have you here. Yeah, everyone stay safe, stay healthy. And next month's book club, I need to actually check that out. It's published on the League of Utah Writers website. And I totally didn't do my homework. Please hold. Jody is actually awesome and has everything updated. So next month's book for April is Play for Time by Paula Mendoza. And you can also check out the bookshop.org links on the website. But I think we're planning on the last, what is today? Friday. What is time? Friday of the month again. So hope to see some of you there. And again, thank you so much, KB, for being here. This was fantastic. I love when book clubs turn into author interviews. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. That was a blast.
Thank you.
It was a delight. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, have a good night.
Have a good
Have a
night.
good night.
I'm gonna